bum bum bottom 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 bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum bottom ba da da 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 ba 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 doobie doobie da da bum bum ba da.
You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson.
I am Brad Gullickson.
And each month we evaluate a different iconic romance within the four-color realm. In this episode, we are passing around a jumbo-sized box of Kleenex. Oh, gross. With sci-fi lovebirds Marko and Alana, as experienced in Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples' Saga, Volume 6 and 7, and we're applying Helen Russell's How to Be Sad to their very, very sad relationship woes.
I did so much crying while reading these volumes, Lisa.
Same town, USA.
Brutal.
We're in the same neighborhood.
Like, it is the type of sad that is oh so good because it is fictional, but at the same time, like, it does leave you emotionally drained.
Mm-hmm. And it is so hard to finish a volume and stop.
Yeah, like the end of volume 7 is almost the saddest ending of any saga trade. To be continued, listeners.
Oh my goodness. But
prepare yourself, Lisa.
But the great thing is, we know we have plenty of material for Helen Russell.
Yes.
And How to Be Sad.
Yes.
Because there is just enough to be sad about.
There really is. There really is. And I'm excited to be on the microphone talking about these comics with you, Lisa. I am feeling very fresh. You are not feeling fresh, I'm going to guess, because it's early in the morning. We're recording this Saturday a.m. I get up and I immediately have to brush my teeth, shower, clean my dirty, filthy body. You have a different philosophy. You like to podcast dirty.
I like to podcast dirty. That is true. For some reason, especially on a day that I don't have to leave, I like to save the shower because I love getting in the shower so much. And also I feel like if I'm completely showered and cleaned and my hair is blow dried and my makeup is on, I feel like I really have to get to work. You know what I mean? So I feel like, well, I must be having fun because I'm still in my pajamas.
But spoilers, you are going to clean today, even though you're not going to work, right? You do eventually shower.
Yeah. In the middle of the day. When I feel okay, I've gotten over the hump of my morning time. Let's get in that show now.
Yeah, we're just so different. It baffles my mind. I kind of understand the idea of not brushing your teeth before you have coffee, because then you have coffee and it completely coffees up your mouth.
Plus, that's bad for your enamel to brush your teeth and then immediately drink coffee.
Oops, my teeth are rotting away then. But for me, it's just I cannot function until I've brushed my teeth, until I've bathed, and you're just the opposite.
My teeth are clean. I'm talking into this microphone with fresh mouth, and I think that the listeners can tell.
Yeah, and so can your husband. There are limits to your filthiness and how much I can handle it. If you're standing across from me, if you're sitting across from me at the podcast table, I don't want you blowing a tsunami of foul stench
of
at
hot
me.
morning breath?
Yeah, I don't need any of that hot morning breath on my podcast, especially when the comics are so damn sad.
Oh, yeah.
I'm already crying from the emotions. I don't need to be crying because of an actual physical attack.
I don't think my mouth is that foul. Now my feelings are going to get hurt.
Oh, well, now we're ready to talk about Saga. And while last episode we said we'd cover Saga Volume 6, but after reading Volume 6, we felt there was not enough Marko and Alana content to devote a whole episode around them. And since we were planning to squeeze 2 volumes into one episode next week, we thought, well, forget that. Let's do that now, squishing Volumes 6 and 7 into this episode that you're hearing right now. If this was not part of your plan, well, we're sorry, but you can hit pause, read Saga Volume 7, and then hit play again. We'll wait for you. Oh, and if for whatever reason this is your first time listening to Comic Book Couples Counseling, you may want to check those show notes. There you'll find links to our previous 5 episodes on Marko and Alana covering Saga trade paperbacks Volumes 1 through 5. You folks can hit that pause button too. Again, we'll wait.
Pause for a funny beat.
Yeah, and we just did it. We just paused for the funny beat,
He
Lisa.
wrote that right into the... I know it's gauche to read the stage direction, but when it's so brilliant.
Well, thank you. Okay, guys, are you back? Let's get on with it. See, I think that funny beat would have been funny if you had not pointed it out, Lisa.
It's like what every podcast does.
Yeah, it's a classic. It's
we
a
need
classic.
a fresh take on the funny beat.
Okay, well, you just did it. I really love these 2 volumes, like I said. And as much as I love Marko and Alana, the devilish pairing between Prince Robot and Goose is just my frickin' favorite thing ever. I love these 2. And as I was reading these comics, I kept finding myself like screenshotting little images of their exchanges and like tweeting them out. Like there's something about the design of Goose and the design of Prince Robot. It's like the perfect odd couple pairing. And of course, like through my obsession, I had to like go to the internet. I remember reading the creation story of Goose that Fiona Staples once told, but I couldn't quite put it down. So I went to the internet. I started scouring for that little tidbit, and my click-clacking brought me to the Entertainment Weekly interview that our buddy Christian Holub conducted with Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples after they announced Saga's return last year at the New York Comic-Con. And in it, Lisa, Brian talks about how he and Fiona, they will have like a mini State of the Union after each arc is concluded. Apparently, while Vaughn knows where this story is going, Staples has asked him to not spoil the ride.
I love that.
Isn't that great? So after each arc, they'll do a little bit of reflection, and she offers input and whatnot, which will change the course of the series. And Goose is an example of this. Staples created the character as a doodle one day and just presented the little person to Vaughn and asked if there was a place for him in this story, and the rest is frickin' adorable history. Except, Lisa, Vaughn said something in this 2021 interview that really concerns me.
Oh, no.
First, he said, and I quote, "And I realized immediately, can Goose be in the book? No, the book is basically about this guy moving forward." So that's kind of interesting, right? And I don't know if I necessarily even believe him, but it's what he says next that got my hair to stand up. Christian basically asks the 2 creators post Saga 54, is Goose okay? And well, without spoiling anything from volumes 8 and 9, because Lisa has not read them yet, Vaughn told Christian that Goose may have to pay for his role in what happens in these volumes we're covering this week, as well as the volumes we'll cover over the next 2 episodes. Here's Vaughn. Fiona, you're his creator, his god. Will we get to see more of that guy ever? Staples. I hope so. I hope we'll see him. Vaughn. That good boy is out there somewhere, even if he doesn't show up in this first issue back. Spoilers, he doesn't. I know readers would boycott otherwise. Vaughn continues, any character who commits any sort of act of violence in Saga, it feels like there's always going to be a cost to that, no matter how much we love them and how adorable they are. So will Goose pay for his sins some days? Someday we'll have to see.
But like not okay, there's like a huge swath of what not okay can be. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are like a stain in the snow somewhere.
Right. But like the fact that he put like Goose's head on a chopping block of sorts in this interview, it freaks me out, because that is a character. And we've met other characters already, and we will meet characters in Volume 7 that I think are incredibly adorable and great additions to the narrative and could spin into all kinds of interesting ways further down the line. And then Vaughn and Staples will kill those characters, right? But if he kills Goose, like, I will not be okay. And, he's going to kill some people that I'm still not okay about. But if he kills Goose, we're in trouble because my relationship will be teetering on the edge of oblivion then. But it's also kind of worth noting that one time Vaughan wrote Lying Cat into a particularly dangerous situation, and Fiona Staples herself threatened to leave the book if anything ever happened to that fellow. Has she said something similar about Goose? I sure hope so.
You did say particularly.
Yeah, I know. I can't say that word particularly. I don't know why I can't say that word.
So we're keeping it in.
Yeah, we're keeping it in. We're moving forward.
But I feel like you spent your entire section talking about Goose.
Yeah.
But we're not really going to be talking about Goose in this episode.
No, not necessarily. But, that's why I wanted to highlight how freaking much I love this character.
But, there is this huge temptation when talking about Saga in this context to put everyone on the couch, especially on the topic of sadness and grief.
There are so many relationships and so many avenues that we could explore how to be sad with these characters.
I think in this 2-volume arc, we could do 2 full episodes on the will and the stock. We could also talk about Sir Robot or Prince Robot, whatever you're calling him these days, and his separation from Squire. But this is comic book couples counseling. We pick one couple to put on the couch. So I think it should be said that even though Saga is eventually ending...
108 episodes, according to Vaughan and Staples.
It doesn't mean we can't circle back to Saga at some later date and go okay, we're doing Saga again, but this time we're doing the will and the stock.
Yes.
Or this time we're doing Goose and Prince Robot 4.
Yeah, I think so. I think Saga is a universe of relationships, and we could theoretically return to this series over and over and over again. And who knows where we go after issue 54, right? Because... the subjects of this series their story might not. The
dynamic family dynamics change.
The focus of the comic might be revealed to be somebody else beyond these two. That's all I'm saying. I got to stop talking.
Well, it's my turn to talk anyway, Brad. So,
okay, good.
So you work on remaining grounded in the present.
Yes, thank you.
We do not know the future.
Right.
And here we go. Let's talk about our love expert. Our relationship expert for Marko and Alana is Helen Russell, using her book, How to Be Sad, Everything I've Learned About Getting Happier by Being Sad. Helen Russell is an author who has dedicated her career to researching and considering cultural approaches to emotions. How to Be Sad is part self-help, part memoir, and she looks into how our anti-sadness culture negatively impacted Helen and her family following her sister's death from SIDS. The book includes cited research and interviews from psychologists, neuropharmacologists, grief counselors, geneticists, psychotherapists, neuroscientists, doctors, and dietitians, and submits that by reframing our cultural perspective on sadness, we might be better equipped to reap the benefits of that emotion. I've just got to say, How to Be Sad as a memoir is a little bit of a gauntlet because she is in many sections of the book recounting parts of her life which are extremely sad, but also she is listing off all of the reasons that we have to be sad in the present.
Right. There's so many of them.
She started this book in 2020.
There's so many more now.
And so she was going okay, this is the time where this book has to come out because we all have really valid reasons to be sad.
Yeah.
And we might as well go at that emotion the most equipped ever.
I was thinking about this the other day with you because you are, one, reading Saga, which in of itself is very sad and can be described as a gauntlet, right? And then you're pairing it with a book dealing with the concept of sadness and our relationship with it as a culture, which can be punishing as well. And you've been listening to the memoir when you do eventually go and shower your body in the afternoon, the late afternoon. You will listen to the memoir as an audiobook in the bathroom. And I catch the book as well. And I mean, it's a lot. You're dealing with a lot, both fictionally, self-help wise, and also just when you log online or look out your window or turn on the news. Yeah,
and there's a lot in her book that parallels my life. She dealt with anorexia, which I also had anorexia at one point, and she deals with, just self-esteem issues. She's also struggled with depression, and so that brings up a lot of, kind of latent stuff for me.
I mean, it brings up a lot of like uncomfortable, squidgy feelings.
So yeah.
But the question becomes, and the reason we picked it for Saga, is exploring the function of sadness through her memoir ultimately beneficial for our understanding of Marko and Alana, and ultimately beneficial for your own understanding of your relationship with sadness?
I think yes. I'm not covering the memoir part of How to Be Sad on these episodes. So if this intrigues you and you don't think that you'll find the topics of anorexia or depression like triggering to you, like I recommend seeking out her book. But I have kind of condensed the material down to like the action plan aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So I do find her tips extremely helpful. And I think that it is good to have a plan for when you feel certain emotions, because like sadness can sometimes be linked with a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. And we know from Brené Brown that the key to hope is to have some kind of plan of action and the knowledge that this emotion is temporary.
And as we discussed last week, the whole idea of sadness being bad is an incorrect notion and something that we are buffeted by through our culture. But what the book is trying to do is prepare you for the inevitability of sadness, which is as much a function in our life as happiness. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, that's always a good reminder, because like when you are sad, it can feel like all you are is sad, and it can feel so oppressive, and you can feel trapped in that state. And, my strategy with that is to brood on that state, and getting out of that state is so difficult. But if you have an action plan, like Helen Russell proposes, you can get out of that, or you can manage that experience.
Yeah, it's not about expediting. It's not about expediting the sadness. It's about experiencing the sadness.
Okay. Yeah. I like that a lot better. Because, see, I was still trapped in my culture of like, we got to get out of sadness.
We've only just started this topic.
Right.
And I think before we get into new material, I think there are a few takeaways from our last session that we need to keep in the forefront of our minds for Marko and Alana. First, we need Helen Russell's definition of sadness, which is, quote, the natural response to emotional pain, feelings of loss, helplessness, hopelessness, or disappointment. That's the end of the quote. And it should never be seen as a failure or something to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
The second thing is that when we have sadness, we should address the problem and not the emotion. So like the tendency is like, oh no, I feel sadness. I need to extinguish that emotion.
Right.
But then we're not considering, okay, well, why am I sad? Our emotions are there to tell us something. So we shouldn't try to dampen or avoid them. And we've seen both Marko and Alana try to avoid sadness by numbing and taking fade away. And in both cases, it didn't really turn out all that great. Sadness is our body's way of telling us that we need to reach out to other people. Like hunger is a cue for food, sadness is a cue for human connection. And we saw this to be the case in Volume 5, Both Marko and Alana were in pretty dangerous circumstances, but Alana had a confidant in Clara.
Yeah.
And she fared much better than Marko, who was surrounded by individuals he didn't trust, Prince Robot 4, Yuma, and Goose, and he spiraled into self-loathing and destructive behavior. The last session was really about curbing those less productive behaviors when it comes to sadness. So now I think Alana and Marko are ready to be introduced to the material of part 1 of How to Be Sad, entitled How to Look After Ourselves When We're Sad. And I love the term look after because I think that like it takes you outside of yourself so that when you're feeling sad, you go like, oh, poor baby.
Yeah.
Allow me to look after you. Allow me to help you. So this is a numbered list. So Brad, you're safe.
Okay, no bullets, huh?
No bullets.
All right,
this time.
good.
So number one is don't fight it. Guess what? When you're sad, you're sad. You may try to rationalize, contextualize, or redefine it, but you know when you have it, and it's not a bad thing. According to Professor Hare from American University, when we feel sad, our brain begins to ruminate. Like worry is the cognitive manifestation of anxiety, rumination is the cognitive manifestation of sadness. Rumination helps us consider next steps to address or change the situation that is making us sad. Oh, when you are fighting your sadness, don't be afraid to rip off some BFTs.
What?
Big fat tears.
Oh.
Scientists have done some research into the function of tears. Why do we cry? Thinking that maybe we're like leaching toxins or endorphins from our face. But tears are just saline from our eye holes. And it's an outward sign of distress. Why? Because other people need to know that we're sad so they can help us. According to Ad Wengerholtz, the tear professor from Tilburg University in the Netherlands, crying is a way to elicit support from others during times of distress.
Yeah. I think that is something that we need to work on as a society, because so often you'll see a crying person and the emotional response is to flee, leave them alone,
space.
give them space. And that is so not the case. And I think, through our relationship, my relationship with crying has changed for the better. You have helped me appreciate your tears and my tears because you are much more free with the saline than I was previously. But now I cry also. And more importantly, like when I see somebody crying, I ask a question. I approach them rather than turn a corner around the alleyway.
And sometimes crying people do not want help. Sometimes they just need to get the emotion out. And that's also totally fine. But I think I don't have the studies at my fingertips, but there have been studies done to show that when someone is in distress, the bigger the crowd that they're in, the less likely people will be to help.
Right.
So just that knowledge makes you go like, okay, so in a big crowd, it has to be my responsibility or no one else will do anything.
And that's where I've experienced crying in public. It's at film festivals. You'd be surprised at how many people cry during a film festival.
Well, 100% one of them is me.
Correct. And what you witness is you see all these people not wanting to notice that person. And so when you do see somebody in a crowd crying, I do think they are, you need to ask them a question. You need to check in with them. And maybe they don't want your help. Maybe they don't need your help, but you should at least say hi, how you doing?
Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean, if you are about to cry, you should immediately, take it to the streets. Because it doesn't mean that you shouldn't also cry alone.
Sure.
Because even when alone, crying can feel great. Crying soothes us, reducing cortisol levels, making us feel less stressed. Psychologist Cord Benecke from University of Kassel, Germany, studied criers versus non-criers, and criers experience fewer, quote, negative aggressive feelings, end quote, like rage and disgust.
Oh, yeah, I believe that based on me.
For me, the bottom line is express the emotion. It doesn't matter if you're with someone or alone, just expressing the emotion feels good.
Yeah, okay. That's a great tip.
Number 2 is lower expectations. This one should not be confused with one of the most common ways to try and fail to avoid sadness, which was avoid meaningful goals. Have big dreams, shoot for the moon, but then really consider what it means to land amongst the stars. Is it really that bad? Disappointment is defined as the psychological reaction that occurs when an outcome doesn't match up to our expectation.
That metaphor, you just like my brain lit up. The idea of like shooting for the moon, missing, but then you're still amongst the stars. How rad is that?
And it is the biggest cliche ever. And our thing is to dismiss it, where we go like, but I told everyone that I was going to the moon.
Yeah, but now I'm in the stars. I'm still in the stars.
Great.
That's great. I love that. Yes.
And maybe missing the sky altogether and being on the ground, that could also be great. We don't know.
Right. And how a failure can lead to discovery in another arena, too. Yeah. Awesome.
In 2014, Dr. Rob Rutledge from University of College London published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that included a mathematical equation for happiness based on our expectations. The research found that it doesn't matter whether or not things are going well for us. What matters most to our happiness is that things are going better than expected.
Interesting. Yeah.
So instead of only striving for the best possible outcome and labeling every other outcome as failure, consider all possible outcomes and broaden your definition for success.
Interesting, yeah.
The road to success is never a straight line. And in most cases, failure is actually a marker of progress.
Yeah, and like how often do you read an article or watch a video where a famous author, a famous comic book person like shares all the rejection letters that they experienced? Like that's a badge of honor. That's a point of pride.
That's one of my, I'm digressing, but that's one of my huge pet peeves reading a bunch of YA stuff for chosen one narratives where like I'm going to use...
Are you going to call somebody out? Are you calling out a comic,
okay,
Lisa?
I was not going to call out a comic.
Okay.
I was going to call out a novel series.
Okay.
But, like, there are so many of these series where it's just, like, you have your chosen one, and it is prophesied that they're going to be a success, and then we just watch them win and win and win.
Right.
And I think that that is a terrible example for young people.
Yeah, garbage.
Number 3, take time, be kind. Don't rush sadness. According to Julia Samuel, author of Grief Works, quote, "We don't allow time for grief in our society. We approve if the bereaved person is brave and just gets on with things, and disapprove if they don't. But grieving takes longer than anyone wants or expects. We can't fight it, and we can only find ways to support ourselves in it. When we block it, there are much higher rates of both physical and mental illness," end quote. Okay, Julia Samuel, we've actually mentioned her before on this podcast, but she specializes in grief from the loss of a person. But I think that you can apply this to all of the little griefs in our life that we have a rejection or disappointment, or we lose a friend, and we go like, oh, I can't believe I'm still worrying about that thing. And we should just and Julia Samuel goes like, well, it's going to take time. And trying to stuff it down is just going to make the pain more acute. It's just going to linger longer.
Yeah.
When you are sad, your brain is going to ask you for time to ruminate, rest, escape. Be patient with yourself and give it time. Try to take time to give your emotion, quote, immersive attention, end quote, where you are just listening to that emotion. So, like, if you are, Brad, going into that rumination state, like, just let it happen. Like, if you're in the rumination state and you're going, like, I should not be feeling this. I'm disgusted with myself for feeling this. How can I stop feeling this? You're not going to resolve anything.
And maybe you should communicate that with your partner, which is hard sometimes. When Brad goes into a brood state, I will now refer to it as a rumination state. Lisa, I'm sorry, I'm in a rumination state. Just give me some space for a second.
And I need to learn to respect that.
Yeah,
I'm like, take me out. Number 4, Avoid deprivation. Don't try to control your sadness by depriving it of what it's asking for. If your sadness is asking for a treat, like watch a movie, read a comic, have a cookie.
Ice cream.
Yeah, ice cream.
I want ice cream.
Give it a treat. It can be, I included this in the copy. It can be a food treat, comic book treat, movie treat, something delightful and harmless, and perhaps a brief distraction.
I'm very good at that part. I've mastered that already.
Okay, then let's go on to number 5.
Good.
Avoid excess.
Oh, no.
There must be balance in all things. You want to avoid numbing behaviors. Ask yourself, am I taking a break from my emotions or am I running from my emotions? Has my behavior taken me to a destructive or at least not productive place?
Okay. All right. I'll underline this portion here.
And then number 6, get mad. This one may be a surprise and a challenge for Marko, who has been trying to curb his penchant for violence and is really afraid of being in a mad state. Unfortunately, many subgroups in our culture, here as everyone but white men, have been socialized to not feel or express anger because it's not ladylike or makes you appear overly threatening and exact retaliation. But according to psychologist Kimberly Wilson, author of How to Build a Healthy Brain, anger is a, quote, self-esteem emotion, end quote, and a reflection of your ability to value yourself. According to Tier Professor Ad Vengerhutz, women are actually more likely to express frustration, which is a sense of powerlessness where you're thinking, like, what else could I have done? Anger is an expression of I deserve better. And a study from Utrecht University showed that subjects who are primed to be angry actually strived harder for rewards versus unprimed subjects.
Interesting.
In other words, getting mad can get things done. The distinction of what is productive anger versus non-productive anger is made by philosophy professor Zach Cogley from Northern Michigan University, who refers to virtuous anger versus vicious anger. Virtuous anger pushes us to persuade others to make changes so that we are treated more fairly. And vicious anger pushes us to take out our angers on others through venting, which is getting someone else mad with no intention of actually making changes, and punishing, hurting someone for causing your emotion. Russell doesn't really go into what makes a person virtuously angry versus viciously angry other than choice and behavior. So maybe it's as simple as a redefinition of options, just taking the option of violence off of the table, like Marko is doing. Like, we're not entitled to physically hurt people, so we have to create a change in other ways. I'm not sure.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, you got to do something. Like, I like the idea of, like, well, violence is not an option.
Right. So we shouldn't also be tamping down our anger. But we have to have a plan for when the anger happens so that we go like, okay, if this situation makes me angry, my options are I should talk to this person or I should change my own behavior or whatever. So while we have Marko and Alana on the couch, sometimes I call her Alana and sometimes I call her Alana.
No one's keeping track, Lisa.
It's a word for my eye holes, not for your ear holes.
Yeah.
But while we have Marko and Alana on the couch this week, we should monitor their behavior for these more healthy options when dealing with their sadness and make note when they are choosing to fall back on more destructive behaviors.
Okay. Well, while I get my notebook in order for that, Lisa, I think we need to do some words of affirmation. Oh, wow. That was mighty powerful. So for first-time listeners, you should know that our words of affirmation are our way that we give back to our new and upgrading Patreon subscribers. We curate and use these ourselves, and we're more than happy to pass them on to you.
This week, we only have one new patron, and I would like to indulge in an entire poem.
Oh.
Is that okay?
I love it. Let's do it.
So this is The Guest House by Roomie. Take a deep breath. And this reading is dedicated to Mike Thompson. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
Yeah, I really like that, Lisa. More poetry on comic book couples counseling.
That idea of going like, I'm a guest house for emotions. They're not staying for long, so just like make the most of them. Like, I've had this poem on my phone, like going like, how can I break this up into like multiple words of affirmation? But I think just as a piece, like just having that like touchstone to go back to of like, okay, be a guest house. Okay, be a guest house.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Thank you for sharing it with us. And thank you, Mike Thompson, for being our new patron. And thank you to all our patrons. They help make this podcast possible. Of course, we don't expect all of you listening to join and support Comic Book Couples Counseling financially. But if you want to give back in just the smallest of ways, you can always leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That really does help us reach more listeners, get into more of those ear holes that Lisa likes talking about.
I love talking about holes.
You love talking about holes. So there you are. We now need to get into session properly with Marko and Alana. Okie dokie, pokey Loki. On to the main event. This week we're discussing Saga Issues 31 through 42, which were collected in trade paperbacks volumes 6 and 7. They were written by Brian K. Vaughan, fully illustrated by Fiona Staples, and lettered by Fonografiks. The issues were originally published between November 2015 and January 2017. And here's the basic plot synopsis taken off the back of the books. Volume 6. After a dramatic time jump, Saga continues to evolve as Hazel begins the most exciting adventure of her life, kindergarten. Meanwhile, her star-crossed family learns hard lessons of their own. Volume 7. The War for Fang is an epic, self-contained Saga event. Finally reunited with her ever-expanding family, Hazel travels to a war-torn comet that Wreath and Landfall have been battling over for ages. New friendships are forged, and others are lost forever in this action-packed volume about families, combat, and the refugee experience. The wild thing about reading these two particular trade paperbacks together... Look, I said the word particular.
Ooh, look at you.
But I still can't say the word particularly. I still can't do it.
Just say it the same, but just say less syllables.
Should we edit this? Not gonna. The weird thing about reading these two volumes back to back is how they truly do operate like a roller coaster ride emotionally. The first volume is this kind of fun heist story. It's all about reunification. And then the second volume, The War for Fang, it takes everything that you were happy about at the end of volume 6 and smashes it.
In both of these volumes, actually, Marko and Alana are getting along extremely well.
It feels so good.
In volume 5, they're separated from Hazel, and that's distressing. But they both really are united in their search. And every time they make progress, they get a little closer.
Right, yeah. So this feels wonderful.
It feels wonderful, and it's an opportunity for them to kind of put some of those latent insecurities behind them.
Yeah, and then in The War for Fang... they are still operating. I love to use the word operating. I don't know if you can tell. They're still operating in a high functioning fashion all the way up until the tragedy of, Fang's decimation and, of course, the loss of their baby.
But even then, like Hazel, as a narrator, said, this was some of the best times we had together as a family. So yeah. I think that we're really getting a really special time in their life and a really beautiful family portrait.
I just think if you were going to summarize what it's like to read Saga to somebody who's never read Saga and you really just wanted to throw them in the deep end without ever giving them the first few volumes, if you gave them volumes 6 and 7, that kind of encapsulates the entire tsunami of emotions that this book can be.
That being said, well, Alana and Marko are in this really high, confident, they're able to cling to their principles place, like Prince Robot 4, emotionally spiraling. The Will is also emotionally spiraling.
Yeah.
So there's always this kind of contrapuntal emotional landscape of all of the characters. Of course, we're going to be focusing on Marko and Alana.
Yeah. So if there are characters who are at a low in their narrative in Saga, there will be other characters who are at a high. And so the focus for us tends to be like, oh, Marko and Alana are at a high, everything is going gravy. But that is not the case for many, many, many other individuals. And, this comic, as we saw at the end of the last volume, it starts with a time jump. Hazel is much older than when we last saw her. What is it? It's
3 years.
Yeah, 3 years. And she is being educated in this detention center. And her guardians are Clara, her grandmother, and Lexus, the last member of the last revolution. And I love them as a duo. What an unexpected treat they are.
Do you get the impression that they become an item?
I was wondering that as I was reading this volume. I don't know if I can necessarily say that's for certain.
Definitely in my fantasy
correct.
They are.
Yes, and mine as well. And, when Clara stays behind, I was not expecting that, and I love that. Although I do feel also a little bit robbed of the relationship of the grandmother being with Hazel and Marko and Alana, and where the story goes from here. I miss Clara's presence, but I do like this idea where she's like, no, I have now formed a new life here in this detention center.
I'm doing something that's meaningful.
These people need me. And yeah, I think that's really beautiful.
But I think in a way, Clara will always be with this family. And I don't mean in a spiritual, and when they pass away, she'll look down. I mean in a literal, she raised Hazel at such a critical time in her development.
I mean, effectively, she's the parent over these 3 years.
And it's the guardian who teaches a child how to emotionally regulate. And we see in this opening scene of Hazel in the classroom that she has grown accustomed to kind of stuffing down and playing off her sadness. It starts with the classroom teacher, Noreen. You can tell, this is a really hip preschool. If
She's
you get to call the
so
teacher
hard.
the first name. But Noreen is trying to do this exercise about, draw and share a picture of something that makes you sad. And all of the children are like, this is a picture of the arm I lost in the war. And this is a picture of my dead brother. And Hazel's like, this is a picture of Tootie Stinkfoot, and when he toots, it smells so bad, and it makes me, really, really sad.
And when the teacher, Noreen, confronts her, it's supposed to be something that makes you sad. His farts are so smelly, they do make me sad.
And the whole classroom, cracks up. But then the teacher takes Hazel aside and says, I have this book, it belonged to my kids. They don't really use it anymore. I want to pass this book on to you. And the book is called Let Me Be, which was a book that Alana gave to Hazel. And Hazel admits that she still has vague memories of her parents. And she begins crying. And the narration, Hazel narrator, says, that had been the first time I cried since I was separated from my parents.
Right.
And she actually later says, Tootie Stinkfoot is kind of her memory of her dad, because she remembered her dad had super smelly feet and her mom was a terrible singer. And, but her not being able to cry, I think, is in part due to the trauma that she has been through. And and part of her survival to look like she's strong and doing fine. But I also think that Marko also has issues with emotional regulation. And now Hazel is being raised by that same guardian. So we might be having some of those same issues we see in Marko start manifesting themselves in Hazel.
And as Hazel ages, we will see so much of her parents in her as like an autonomous being now. Like before this point, Hazel was really just an object, right? Like any baby or toddler. They're not a person yet. And now Hazel is a person.
She's walking around and she's creating ideas and she's keeping secrets.
Yeah, and causing chaos.
Marko and Alana don't even enter the story until chapter 32, which opens with Marko's hands around Alana's throat, and they are doing this little improv sketch so that they can break into the Varigate. And so Alana is his captive, and he's like, let me in, to the security guy. And it's clear that they are rubbing off on each other. Like, he used to be so suspicious of her, like, acting skills, but now, like, he's really doubled down on the nonviolence, and he goes like, hey, a little trickery is not a bad thing.
As a reader, I don't feel robbed of our time with Hazel over the course of those 3 years. I do feel a little robbed of our time with Marko and Alana, because I feel like there's an entire series that could be in this particular time period that we don't actually get to see. It's so much fun. It does feel like a crime caper comic, something that Guy Ritchie would direct, right? And Fiona Staples' acting in this issue is some of the best that she has ever done in this series. Alana's facial expressions in this issue, everything is right there. Hand Fiona Staples an Oscar. The performances are as good as, actually better than, the performances that Alana and Marko are attempting in this robbery.
They just look like they're having the friggin' best time. And even Hazel in the narration say that in some ways her parents were never closer than the years after mom lost me and reconnected with dad.
And it's clear. And, you know, you're jealous of the time, the stories you didn't get.
You see them really trusting each other and admiring each other and deferring to each other's expertise. That being said, they have not connected physically,
right? Yeah.
Since they lost Hazel. And Hazel narrating refers to it as like an unspoken vow, that they have this unspoken vow to not have sex until Hazel is returned to the family. And if they're truly looking after themselves in their sadness being separated from Hazel, they should be avoiding deprivation. So if they feel like it's like one thing if they're just like, I'm too sad to be horny right now. But if they really are like having this kind of moment of abstinence because they are sad, and they like, if the temptation is there, if the lust is there, they should be serving that need, which they do very soon after this. So
the way I interpret that vow is, yes, absolutely part of that avoidance situation. Like, they are creating a wall around what is actually their ultimate fear, because we learn later through Hazel's narration and how Hazel has access to this knowledge. I'm not 100% sure, but she says that both of her parents at this moment in time actually believed that Hazel was dead. And I feel like that vow is part of them barricading themselves from their ultimate dread.
Yeah, they're afraid if they get over emotional and let themselves go in that way, then they're going to let themselves go in other ways and have to have that conversation.
Yeah, but like if they fully connect again, if they become a true partnership, which includes physical intimacy, then they have to share this secret knowledge, which they are probably thinking that the other person isn't thinking this, but they are both thinking that Hazel is dead. And how awful it would be to go, Marko, I think we're doing this and it's fruitless and I'm afraid that Hazel's dead. And then that would be like a betrayal to your partner, and it would plummet them maybe both into a despair. That's the worry. But to your point, like if you are not sharing your ultimate dreads with your partner, you're just prolonging the sadness, the pain that is with the sadness.
For me, they're both continuing to strive to reunite the family and have Hazel. To me, this falls under the umbrella of, like, perhaps they have to lower their expectations.
Oh, interesting.
Because this war is huge, and it's spread over several planets.
And it's eating people up. It's a meat grinder.
So, like, yes, in this case, it does work out. They do reunite with Hazel, but if they never reunited with Hazel, what then?
Yeah.
Like, if their only measure of success is it's all three of us or failure.
Yeah. I was thinking about, Lisa and I have been downloading. We've just been consuming true crime podcasts, and longtime listeners know about our uncomfortable obsession with true crime stories. But I've been listening to a particular one that involves a missing woman, a missing daughter, a missing wife. And, it's now been decades for this family of not knowing where their loved one is, but they have to continue going. And so how do you live with Hazel never being there and maybe never, ever coming back?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, to me, I go, like, maybe I would want to talk to them about, like, okay, maybe not failing is continuing to look for Hazel.
Yeah.
Until you know one way or another.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
maybe success can be like, at some point we are going to have to stop looking. But
what happens for Marko and Alana in this issue is that they do discover that Hazel is alive and detained, and they now have a location. And when that happiness comes back into them, they can then give themselves to each other. And so, like, I struggle with, like, well, that is a satisfying conclusion to this issue. It's also a little bit of a cheap, like, resolution to their emotional crisis.
Well, I think that this issue is going to come up again.
Yeah.
Because if their definition of success is these three people on
together.
The same plane of existence, they're going to have to redefine success.
Right.
To create happiness, to ensure happiness in the future.
To assure life in the future, continuation.
So their high expectations work out this time, but I'm pretty sure they're not going to work out every single time.
No spoilers, Lisa. Although, like, even spoilers for the next volume, you're right. Like, they have a familial loss next volume. They have a familial surprise at the end of this volume, and then they lose that.
Maybe I'll drop this in here. I wasn't sure where to put this particular tidbit in my notes, but there is a common belief that parents who lose a child are less likely to stay together.
Yeah, that is a trope that you see in film all the time.
And I think people do believe it to be true. Like, like you see your spouse reminds you of the child you lost, and that is sad.
And there are certainly cases where that is true in life.
Right. And that was true for Helen Russell's parents. After her sister died, her family quickly split up. But statistically, according to the Institute of Medicine, 72% of couples who lose a child stay married.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in my family, we have 2 incidences of that, and the families both remain together.
And I think that it might be because the other person in that couple understands the sadness of losing a child.
Yeah, no one can quite understand it other than the other person.
And that sadness we think is destructive is actually a source of strength.
Yeah, unifying.
And so you compare the 72% of couples staying together to the American Psychological Association statistic of like 40 to 50% of marriages split up. So...
Yeah, interesting. And then you compare it to the Hollywood statistic. Yeah, blah, blah, blah.
Like, I don't know if those statistics are really all that comparable, considering, like, a lot of couples get divorced before they have kids.
Right.
Right? So I'd be interested to see the statistics of, like, couples that have kids staying together versus couples who have kids and one of them dies.
Yeah. I don't know. You have to get on those statistics, Lisa.
No. This is about as deep as I go. I just checked to see if there's a citation, and yep, there is. Got to be true.
But at the end of this issue, Marko and Alana are hopeful. They know where they're going. They have boned. They look like they're in a pure bliss state. They have probably created life in this action here.
Ooh,
all things look awesome, unless you are the Will or Goose Squire or Prince Robot, because so much other stuff is going on in this volume that is not working out, that will eventually drive more problems toward Marko and Alana. But again, we're not focusing on that right now.
For Marko and Alana, everything's coming up Millhouse.
Oh no, that won't last for long, because they gotta go find Prince Robot because they need his help to get through the Landfallian security measures and his royal connections or his royal schematics.
Just the shape of his head, really, because they invited him along to impersonate some duke or something.
Right. And then, of course, the Landfallian guards are like, well, they all look alike, these people from the Robot Kingdom. And Prince Robot is deeply offended, as he should be. So, Goose convinces Prince Robot to go with them to help free Hazel, and Robot reluctantly leaves Squire behind, and he's only going to become more and more reluctantly involved in any action with Marko and Lana. But for now, they're together, and they do get through those security measures. They do break into the detention center just in time, really, because teacher Noreen, who now knows about Hazel's tricky origin, is trying to, in her very, helpful way, but the whole time, Lisa, I was like, this is going to go horribly wrong. Like, when Noreen came around to Hazel, like when Hazel showed Noreen her wings, what did you think was going to happen?
I didn't trust Noreen.
Yeah.
I was like, Noreen is going to rat her out in a second.
Yeah.
Which may still have been the direction it was going. She went so far as to have Hazel in a box. And she was trying to get out of the detention center.
I think she was trying to help in her way, but she is one of those helpers where she's more trouble than she's worth the entire time. Like, I'm just so anxious every time she's on the page, and I was extremely relieved when Marko showed up when he did.
But forever, Noreen remains this kind of symbol of Hazel's autonomy. She is making her own calls. Hazel never feels guilty or ashamed that she showed her wings to someone.
Right.
She said, hey, I've hung with this big yellow mantis chick. She seems cool to me, and I needed someone. I needed to cry. I needed to unload.
Hazel witnessing Noreen's empathy is proof that not everyone in the universe is an outright monster.
Yeah, but Hazel now trusts her instincts. She has the instincts of a 5-year-old.
Sure.
But Marko does arrive, and he's holding Ponkonk, her little doll, and he's really concerned that Hazel is not going to recognize him because she was a toddler. She was barely a toddler the last time Hazel saw him. But of course, she recognized him immediately.
Daddy.
And even you just saying that gives me a little choked up.
It's the most emotional moment of this particular volume. Man, am I saying the word particular a lot.
It's only because you're self-conscious about it.
I'm super self-conscious about it now.
But during this scene of reunion, Hazel, in my notes, I call her Hazel Narrator. When can I just call her Hazel Narrator?
Yeah.
So during the scene, Hazel Narrator is recounting a story that Marko told to her about getting dropped off at school. Like when he had to start going to school, he would cry every day in devastation over being separated from his parents. And even once the crying stopped, he still had that yearning to be home.
Yeah.
And school was what taught him to love being home.
Yeah, so good, so well written.
And I think it's so important to keep in mind, like, all of these small griefs are preparing us for the big grief.
Yeah, I like that idea that you were just talking about where sorrow shared can be a bonding experience. And you certainly see that throughout Saga.
I also think that we see in Saga, in times of great strife and turmoil, they still have moments of profound happiness.
Sure.
And I think a lot of times we go like, I don't know if I could handle being separated from Brad, or I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle losing my parents.
Right.
And the truth is that we can handle pretty much anything. And like, just like we think, oh, if I change this thing about my life, I'm then going to be happy. Just like that isn't really necessarily true. Like, if something happens to you, Brad, that doesn't mean I'll never be happy again.
We make happiness in the worst environments. I think a lot about my grandfather growing up in the Depression, and he would always tell us he was never happier than when he was 10 years old, and at the most poor his family has ever been and would ever be. And so, like, you know, in the worst moments, there is light. You have to be your own light. I was just reading House Cat Trouble, the new comic book. You should all be reading House Cat Trouble. But that is one of the things that one of the house cats, or one of the street cats, tells Buster, the house cat. You have to be your own light in the darkness. And I'm folding that into my personal philosophy.
I think that we should save that one for words of affirmation. I think
there are so many words of affirmation in House Cat Trouble, Lisa.
I am so excited.
You're going to love it.
But I think, like, with the looking after ourselves when we're sad, like lowering expectations, like, because we feel like we are lowering expectations by saying like, well, as long as I'm with Brad, then things are going to be okay. But even our lowest expectation is not guaranteed. And so maybe, like, you know, we should make goals, but maybe the best thing is to not have any expectations.
Yeah. You got to seek things. You got to be like hopeful and adventurous in your planning and for your future. But if everything doesn't fall according to that plan, don't let it destroy you. Easier said than done.
In How to Be Sad, I took this out of my notes as well, but I make up for it by saying everything I edited out from my notes to make them too long. It's called like adaptive optimalism. And optimalism is this like thing that I don't agree with, where it's like optimalism is the belief that we live in the best possible universe because this is the universe that exists. You know, like this has to be the best situation because this is the situation that I'm in.
Lisa and Brad, we believe in the multiverse.
We don't believe in that. So in my head, I rewrote it, and instead of saying adaptive optimalism, I like to think of it as adaptive optimism. Like, from whatever point that you're in, there is something that you can do to make the situation better. And you just have to always restart and rebuild from the existing present.
Yeah, every second is a chance to turn left or right. And speaking left or right, you know, this issue ends, the final issue, the final page of this volume is Marko and Alana realizing, thanks to Petrichor's really great sense of smell, that Alana is indeed pregnant.
And the final page of this volume, before the to be continued, is Alana making the happiest face and Marko looking like shocked.
Yeah, I can't decide what panel is going to be the main panel for this episode. That's going to be our show page. I have a feeling I'm going to pick this one. Listeners already know which one I did. But right now, this is running point for what our show page image will be. I love this moment. Again, it's just so damn sad given where it goes from here. So we lose Clara from the team for a while, but we gain Petrichor.
Whom I love.
And Prince Robot is with them, and Hazel's back with the family.
He's Sir Robot now.
So yeah, Sir Robot. Sir Robot's with them now. So we've got an interesting unit. Goose is not with them. Squire's not with them. All right, it's time to get into the War of Fang and see how this all works out for everybody. Not well, Lisa. Not well at all. And, what we learn immediately is that the rocket tree ship it needs fuel. It's running out of fuel, and they need to touch down somewhere. And the suggestion is made that they go to Fang. And the problem with Fang is it's a comet that is a tremendous source of fuel for both Landfall and Reef, and these two factions have been fighting on it for generations. And Marko has been on Fang before, and he's killed people on Fang. He has terrible memories associated with the many battles he experienced on Fang, and he does not want to go back.
But as Petrichor points out, they don't really have any other options, and they'll only be there for like 30 minutes or so. 6 months later.
And they've adopted this entire religious meerkat family into the treehouse. These refugees who have to be, next to Goose, the second most adorable creatures in Saga.
We always talk about Marko being the idealist and the upholder with his nonviolent shtick, but Alana is totally radical in her acceptance of others. She's just gone you know what? If we have resources, we'll share them with whomever. Yeah. I think she might be slightly biased because how cute they are.
Yeah.
But she's definitely one of those who goes well, I'd rather die of trusting too much than living this distrustful life like Petrichor is living.
And Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples are really going to test that.
And Marko really does prescribe to Alana's beliefs of radical acceptance. And he even mentions it to Petrichor, if my wife taught me anything, there is no such thing as us or them. And as parents, they're passing this on to Hazel as well. And I think this will serve her well in her life of bouncing from place to place.
What's sort of curiously complicated about this is how Alana does go into this kind of mom mode. She does feel like she is in her element with this growing family that they have created. But Marko, back on Fang, he's sort of suffering quietly, alone, with being in this place of total violence that he used to partake in. And now he is sneaking off away from the ship to monitor the front lines. And it's kind of, picking at him. It is that scab that he wants to heal, but being here, he cannot heal.
He is sticking to the nonviolence thing to a kind of aggressive degree, to the point of irrationality. He's not even taking the sword along as a precaution just in case someone attacks. And at one point, Jabara goes what's going on? You need to be able to protect your family. And he mentions to her, it's hard. It's hard for me to be here because the last time I was here, I killed somebody.
Yeah, and she's like, what do you mean it's hard to be here? I live here.
but she goes oh, well, then I understand why it might make you sad or it might bring back unhappy memories. And he's like, no, I loved it. I loved killing people. And I am so afraid of that part of me coming back and ruining my family.
Marko is filled with shame for how he took pleasure in the skill of killing.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think that he is tamping down some of his concerns about having a second child.
Sure.
Like, Alana has never been happier. She is, Jabara is giving her a little birthing bracelet, and she's calling a big crowd to dinner, and she just seems so excited and happy. And every time the baby has come up, Marko has looked concerned.
Right, yeah. He does not have a smile. Or if he does have a smile, it's not a joyous one.
So I think that he, it's like the sex thing. Like, if I allow my emotions to get too big, then everything's going to have to come out. And I don't know if I have the time to take to deal with this sadness. He's afraid of looking after himself in that way.
Well, I mean, he doesn't have the time because Fang is on a collision course with a time suck, which is like this crazy cosmic baby. I love the idea of a time suck being a baby. Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples both have children. They are tremendous time sucks on their creative life, their careers. And so Fang is on a collision course, and, the family, Marko's clan, knows that this time suck is coming, and they got to get off the comet. Unfortunately, the Meerkat family, Jabara's people, they are a very faithful people, and they've come close to hitting time sucks in the past, and they believe that their lord will spare them this time. And so they elect to stay on Fang while Marko and Alana's people get out of Dodge.
Alana does everything short of shooting them in the face to get them onto the ship. And I think this is going to be particularly hard for Hazel, because she and Curdy have become incredibly close, like kissing on the mouths close.
Yeah.
And I think that is going to be something hard to explain to her, because Hazel wasn't raised with a faith. And we know from a private conversation that Curdy and Hazel had, she doesn't believe in any kind of god or whatever, or feather fairy for that matter. So I think that Alana is not going to be able to rationalize the choice that Jabara and her family made.
Well, you'll have to wait till next volume, Lisa, to answer that, because this one just ends in the most bleakest way possible. We do learn behind the scenes that Landfall and Wreath are collaborating to destroy Fang through Gwendolyn and Sophie's actions. They give Landfall this device that, I don't know,
it's like a Hellblazer box.
I mean a Hellraiser box.
Oh, excuse
Lisa.
me. I sometimes get those confused. It's a very honest thing to do.
Listen to our Sandman Patreon episodes. Out of this box comes this like electric cosmic woojity woo, and it goes into the time suck, and the time suck baby starts spewing black goo everywhere, and that black goo drowns Curdy and his family. And those are the last pages. Poor Curdy just gasping for air and going down.
Those are the very last pages. But before those pages, in trying to get the tree house off the planet,
and battle another bounty hunter, the March.
Yeah, they get stuck in the goo, and it takes a little jostling to get them loose. And that jostling throws Alana against a wall, and then she falls into like the sunken living room.
Yeah. And before that, though, Lisa, Marko kills the March. Marko obliterates the March, just shoots him up like Dillinger.
Yeah. Well, because he had used that rifle thing, and it kind of throws like buckshot kind of thing.
It's their Tommy gun.
So he's broken his vow.
Yeah.
And then Alana is thrown against the wall, and she realizes that the baby is no longer kicking, and Marko listens for a heartbeat.
There's no heartbeat.
And and they both begin crying.
It's the worst kind of ending.
Yeah. And then everybody's covered in goo, blackness, blackness, blackness,
Like
to be continued.
The last batch of pages is just black goo pages, just total blackness. And as you flip those last few pages, especially on a reread, just structurally, that is so effective for sinking your mood. And like we said at the beginning of this episode, it was really hard not to go to the next volume in a way to shake off this dread-filled emotion that you're left with.
Hazel, narrator, on those last couple of pages as we watch Curdy drown, is talking about, like, sometimes the relationships that cause her the most heartache is the relationships that never really came to fruition.
Yeah.
Like, she met someone, had this great time together.
Chemistry with Curdy, kisses with Curdy.
But then you never see that person again. And I think that relates back to, like, the idea of expectation, that you meet someone and you think how beautiful your relationship is going to be, and then there is the heartache of never reconnecting. And I think that's just a reminder that, you know, we really have to cherish the people that we are with while we are with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Live every day, as they say. Live every day to the fullest, I think is the actual phrase.
Live
right?
every day until eventually you
stop living. Welcome to Saga. Lisa, as a first-time reader of these comic books, how do you feel after completing volumes 6 and 7? Like, what's your feeling in relation, like, what is your relationship now with Saga, and how has it now changed because of these two particular volumes?
I think just like any couple that we talk about on the podcast, like, my appreciation for them just deepens. But with Saga, I feel this tremendous momentum at the end of each volume where I just want to move on to the next emotion. I want to see where this story is going.
And because the main tragedy, which we're not going to actually mention other than like dance around it, that because you know the basics of the main tragedy, like that hangs over your first time reading experience in a way that it did not for other people who were unaware of that.
Wish I wasn't aware
of
how this was going to go.
You say that like it's my fault. I thought
it is your fault.
My fault.
You told me.
Was it the internet? The internet didn't tell you?
It was 100% Brad Gullickson, and I understand why you did it. It was because you were sad.
Yeah, I got
and you wanted to unburden yourself.
Yeah, and I want to gain unification through the sorrow, Lisa.
Yeah, I know, but it really has tainted my experience.
Sorry.
But it does remind me to cherish the time that I have with all of these characters because it is brief and beautiful.
Yeah, but hopefully not with Goose. Goose is forever.
We can hope so. So, Brad, I think that we're ready to discuss some of our takeaways from these 2 volumes of Saga and also our ongoing discussion with Helen Russell about how to be sad.
Well, I think like the what I connect to most, as this conversation progressed, this idea of sharing sadness and needing to share sadness and speak sadness to another when you are feeling it. That's going to be my big takeaway. I think it is something that Marko and Alana will continue to struggle with the way that we all continue to struggle with it. But I would hope, and I think me and you, Brad and Lisa, are pretty good at this. You're certainly good at this.
I can't, if I feel even the slightest bit of feeling, I'm announcing it.
Right. You will absolutely come to me with your sadness. And the trick for me is to absorb the sadness and resist the urge of correcting the sadness or fixing the problem. And really just about okay, first let's figure out, let me just enjoy the sadness with you. That's a challenge for me. Now, it is more difficult for me to share sadness with you because I do go into that brood state. And I think this conversation hopefully has helped me realize that there is a deepening of a relationship that occurs when you do fully give your sadness to another person.
But I do think that I need to respect your need to ruminate.
Yes, ruminate. That's another good word. That's another good takeaway.
Like, just the other day, you were having a moment of rumination, and I was like,
it definitely sounds better.
I was like, well, your rumination,
it's harshing my mellow.
Not that it was harshing my mellow. I think it was about recording the podcast.
It was, yes.
And, I put you, through my bad behavior, I put you into a bit of a sad, and we were like, okay, well, we can't record now because you're having a sad. So I was like, well, if we've decided we're not going to record the podcast, stop being sad so we can go and enjoy the rest of our day. I was like, let's get busy. Yeah. That was I fell back onto what I learned last week.
But like in sharing that experience, it did speed us along to get me out of my rumination state, and we did end up having a lot of fun that day. So,
but I think also we want to remind ourselves when we are in a rumination state, we are looking for resolution. You should always be striving to resolve whatever the issue is. Yeah,
processing is part of the process.
I think that even with Marko kind of holding back some of his emotions, I think that as a couple, they are very highly functioning in stressful circumstances. I think that as much as we would love to just be this open channel of emotions, there are things that sometimes are urgent that need to be taken care of. And there are circumstances where you go I'm going to allow my partner to be happy while she can, and I'll do what I can on my own. I'll talk to Petrichor. I'll talk to Jabara. I will use other resources other than my number one to process some of this.
Yeah.
I think also from Helen Russell, I'm really taking away the idea of looking after yourself when you're feeling sad, and to almost get outside of yourself and go hey baby, hey sweetheart, what do you need right now? I see that you're sad. How can this be helped?
Yeah, I would also add the thing that I'm taking away from the Helen Russell side is this idea of keeping your expectations in check. The metaphor of shooting for the moon and landing in the stars, and hey, the stars are pretty darn good. I'm keeping that for sure.
Yeah, the idea of broadening your definition of success.
Yeah.
I think is really, really important.
I've really enjoyed this conversation, Lisa.
Me too.
I say this every Saga episode, but I am madly, deeply in love with this comic book. The more I read it, the more it reaches the heights of my very favorite comic books. I do think it is a masterpiece, and I'm very excited to get into the next episode.
Me too. I have missed Marko and Alana in these two issues. I love the other characters so very much.
But they have been, especially in the first volume, they were barely in the first volume.
And frankly, in these two volumes, they've been very busy.
Yes.
And so we haven't had a lot of couple time.
Lisa, they're going to continue to be pretty darn busy for the next two volumes. So yes, next week, our next episode is going to be on Saga Trade Paperback Volume 8, a very good trade paperback. And building into the week after that, we will do Saga Volume 9. So only 2 more volumes to go.
And then however many issues are out now.
In our Saga Volume 9 episode, we will probably include the 3 issues after that. So the 3 issues that Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples have returned to post-Volume 9.
So what's the plan for when Saga is over? We'll have to come back and...
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, right? So when we did Sex Criminals, we did the first 5 volumes in the course of 4 episodes. And then when that series finally concluded with 1 more volume, we did a 1 pod stand episode to wrap it up. I'm wondering if we should do 1 pod stand episodes after every arc is concluded.
Okay.
But listeners, if you have thoughts on that, would you rather wait for us until Saga is completely done in 108 issues, or should we, once every arc is completed, return for an episode? I'm leaning towards that because I just
How can we not talk about it?
Exactly.
I'm sure we're going to have a lot of sadness to process with y'all.
Yeah, and I think we're also going to start doing written reviews of Saga issues on the Comic Book Couples Counseling website, so be on the lookout for that as well. And on the Patreon feed this week, we have a conversation with writer-artist Nick Dragata and his co-writer Caleb Gollner about their new Image comic series Ghost Cage. Nick Dragata, one of our all-time favorite artists, the artist behind East of West. That was so exciting to talk to them both about Ghost Cage. And if you are not a Patreon subscriber, you can also check out several other conversations that we have unlocked for you. We talked to Cherish Chen about Radiant Red and Jarrett Krasaska about Lunch Lady. And so browse around, take a look, see if you like it or not.
Of course, if you are a Patreon subscriber, there are some sweet, sweet nothings that we whisper only into your ears.
That's right. We're doing our Sandman issue by issue series. We've covered Sandman's first 25 issues, 25 episodes. And we are doing a Batman spoiler-filled review cast. That is still happening, Lisa.
It's in the future.
It's in the future. Very excited to put that conversation on the mic. So there you have it. How else do where do we go from here, Lisa, now that we've done all our plugs?
I don't know where you're going next, Brad, but I'm going into that shower because I am a dirty, dirty girl. Brad. Where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
Oh, please send all your bubblicious words of affirmation to this squeaky clean guy at Mouthdork on all social media. If you have words of affirmation for our logo, you can send them to Aaron Prescott at A Cool Hand Fluke. And if you have some words of affirmation for our Radical banner and show poster, send them to Karen Charm at Karen_X-Men fan. Lisa, where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
I actually have already showered.
Oh,
Will
what?
you be able to tell audibly when that was?
Oh, there was an edit.
But I am always accepting words of affirmation at Sidewalk Siren on Instagram and Twitter. If you'd like to spend more quality time with us, you can subscribe to us on Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube, Google, and Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to get exclusive, you can join our Patreon, where you'll get more content, including weekly bonus episodes.
If you'd like to reach out and touch us electronically, you can email the podcast, cbccpodcast@gmail.com. You can visit our website, comicbookcouplescounseling.com, or follow us on Instagram and Twitter at CBCC Podcast.
You can give us the gift of 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and if you'd like to do an active service, why not write a review of the show while you're there? We are fluent and receptive in all 5 love languages. It really warms our hearts and helps the pod.
So until next time, friends, keep your love tank full.
And your psychic rapport open.
Doopy doopy bum bum ba bum bum ba.
My mouth is so spitty.
Oh.